imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole? Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of election, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I am your host, Popeye, from federaljack.com. It is August 2nd, 2013. Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. I am super excited. You know how I am about bringing on people that I consider legends, and I don't get starstruck or anything like that. That's not how I roll. But there are certain people that are out there that I would consider to be legendary and that I've said have a brass set of balls that would not fit in a dump truck. And my next guest coming up is one of those people. I'm telling you, he's taken on one of the biggest dragons there is, and he's paid for it. So I'm going to let him get into his whole story tonight. The whole next hour, you're going to learn all about him. But we have a short, quick segment, so I want to bring him up without wasting any more time. Tonight's guest is also, by the way, a host here on Unbound. He's got a radio show that you can tune into here and listen to weekly. All of his archives are here. I'm going to let him plug everything. Anyway, without further ado, Mr. Joe Banister. Joe, welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks, Popeye. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I got to tell you, first and foremost, I salute you, sir. You have, as I said in my intro there, you have a brass set that would not fit in a dump truck. I don't know many people that, A, would take on the IRS in general, B, take on the IRS while working for them. And then once you do in this investigation that you did into, what you found out, you send the information to your bosses, and you promptly get told to, kick rocks. I mean, dude, really, honestly, thank you. I don't know if anybody's ever said that to you, but thank you for doing what you did, Joe, because when I've talked to people about the IRS or anything like that, and the whole total unconstitutional, the fact that it's totally unconstitutional what they do, the fact that just it's highway robbery, it's theft. It's literally they're under the guise of being a government agency, they're sticking a gun in your face. And to try to explain it that way to somebody, a lot of people, what are you, nuts? You have to pay taxes. What are you, a terrorist or something? And when I show people your story and I tell them what you had the courage to do and say, look, this guy worked for the IRS, and he says, no, wrong, they're lying. So, that takes the wind out of their sails. You're not some conspiracy, and of course I'm a conspiracy theorist myself. I hate using that label, but you're not some kid, they love to say conspiracy theorist or a fat kid in his mom's basement with his boxer shorts on and a tinfoil hat, and that wouldn't describe you in any way, shape, or form. You worked for the IRS. You were, an agent, And here you are saying the same things that we do. So I have to say right off the bat, thank you so much for what you did, because A, it inspired a lot of people, but also it made a lot of people's job waking certain people up maybe easier. So I just want to give you a big thank you, because I know myself and a lot of other people really appreciate what you did.
Well, it's very kind of you to say so. I don't really feel that way about myself, but I guess after 14 years and so few following me out the door, I guess it makes it look like a bigger deal than I treated it. To me, it was just a duty, and when you compare what people have had to sacrifice and suffer, whether it be the Revolutionary War or the Civil War, or going over to fight, in Europe in World War II.
No, dude, you trust me, you made a huge sacrifice. I'm going to cut us off because the break's sneaking up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. So, I don't want to waste any time. Joe, I want you to take, I'm going to give you, we got, about 14 and a half minutes. I want you to take as much time as you need and start from the beginning. I want you to explain to the listeners. Now, remember, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to let him give a little bit of background and, take whatever. I want you to give a little bit of background about what you did for the IRS and stuff. But he worked for the IRS, and while working for them, started to investigate whether or not people had to pay income taxes. Okay? Again, that's they don't want their own actually unplugging from the matrix and starting to think outside the box, and that's exactly what happened. So, Joe, the floor is yours. Start from the beginning. You're working for the IRS, what you did, and then what got you in. What made you look into this?
Well, your build-up is so wonderful. I hope I can measure up, Popeye. But basically, where do I start? Well, 50 years old now. Graduated from college way back in 1986 and spent a few years in the private sector, and initially thought that's where I would stay. I had an accounting degree and had earned my CPA certificate, Certified Public Accountant certificate, from the state of California. And as I spent a few years out of college and in my career, I realized that it was incredibly boring and I didn't see how I could possibly last another, 30 or 40 years being in a CPA. And so you'd think that I would have already figured that out back when I was in college, but I got an accounting degree because I was told by a mentor that it was a very valuable degree and that I would always have work. And he was definitely right about that. But anyway, I was kind of looking at other careers and thought, what am I going to be able to do that'll keep my motor running and keep me enthused about going to work every day? And I decided that I should look at law enforcement, and basically federal law enforcement, because generally federal law enforcement looked for people like me, people who had accounting, finance, taxation background. So based on the advice of some people I knew, I applied to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The FBI, pretty much everybody's familiar with. Back in the 90s was when they were really starting to develop a really bad reputation, of course, with Waco and Ruby Ridge and those kinds of things. But up until that point, the FBI had a pretty cool reputation. I mean, everybody wanted to be an FBI agent, including me. But it turned out that they had a hiring freeze. This is way back when Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House. And so due to that hiring freeze, the FBI couldn't hire me, even though I had passed through all of their gauntlet of qualification stuff, psychological exams, physical exams, competency exams. And so this hiring freeze came about, and there I was just basically waiting to get a plane ticket back to Quantico, Virginia, to be an FBI special agent. Meanwhile, this other application to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, thank goodness that I had applied to the IRS as well, because the FBI, I'm just waiting around and nothing's happening. The IRS calls me in about August of 1993 and asks me if I'd be interested in a special agent position with the IRS in their San Francisco office. I grew up in San Jose, which is about 50 miles south of San Francisco. And, frankly, at that point in my life, I had my heart set on an FBI agent because, hey, everybody would think I was really cool if I was an FBI agent. And again, this is back in the 90s, today they don't have such a great reputation. And, how many people want to be an IRS agent? I mean, I didn't have that many friends as it was. Once you become an IRS agent, you can kiss whatever remaining friends you have goodbye. But the IRS was basically the only agency that was interested in me at the time because it's very difficult to get into federal law enforcement. So the idea kind of grew on me. I learned more about what the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, or CID for an acronym, what they did, and found that it was pretty interesting. You did a lot of money laundering work. You did a lot of the same things that an FBI agent would do. It's just that your focus, your jurisdiction, was a lot more narrow. It focused on income tax laws and money laundering laws primarily. So basically, I could see that I would, be able to scratch my law enforcement itch by working at the IRS, and really I had the exact kind of qualifications that would, fit really nicely. Being a certified public accountant and specializing in taxation. So I went ahead and accepted their offer, and in November of 1993, I was sworn in as an IRS special agent. And for your listeners that aren't aware, right now today there's about 2,700 IRS special agents, and the special agent designation is actually it's called a GS 1811. And that series, that employment series, is present throughout the federal government. So if you work for ATF and you're a special agent, you're a GS 1811. If you're an IRS special agent, you're a GS 1811. If you're an FBI special agent, you're a GS 1811. So in terms of the government, the federal government, and how they look at you and your position, it's the same position. It's just that depending on the agency will depend on what focus you're going to have in your investigative duties. So anyway, just that with a little background. Most of the IRS, there's about 100,000 employees at the IRS, and most of them deal with the civil inquiries, audits, collection, that kind of thing. But they have this very small cadre of IRS criminal investigators known as special agents, and that's the job that I was sworn into back in November of 93. And the swearing-in ceremony, I was the only one. Normally they'll swear in 10, 20, 50 people, raise your right hand. It's very perfunctory. But mine was very meaningful. I had my family there, videos, cameras, the whole bit. And I was very mindful about my oath because, you take an oath to God. And being a, born and raised Roman Catholic who was very much into believing in God and believing that God had certain rules, like not bearing false witness against your neighbor, not stealing, I think good rules for society. I was very mindful of that oath. And so I expected to spend a full 20-year career at the IRS. And as you may have noticed, 2013, I'd actually be retiring this year. Would have spent 20 years there. But there were God had other plans, shall we say. And after about 3 years of working at the IRS, I was really enjoying myself immensely. I was very fulfilled in my career as I had hoped I would be, and was not, people might think, well, yeah, you're working for the IRS, you can pound on people and hammer on them and get on a big power trip. That wasn't what I was there for. I really thought that I'd be able to utilize my financial skills to serve my country. And, treasuries need defending, and the United States has a treasury. And, I still feel that today. Governments have to raise some level of revenue, and there are people that are going to cheat on money that they owe. So all those beliefs and standards are still with me. But what happened was about 3 years into my career at the IRS, which I thought would be 20 years, I was listening to a talk radio show whereby a lady, DV Kidd, was a guest. And the host was a guy, former special forces guy, a colonel in the Army, a real just nice, guy, and he was very constitutionally minded. He wasn't, Republicans are always right and Democrats are always wrong. He just would talk about the truth. And many times, this is back in 1996, before the internet really took off. It was really refreshing on a mainstream radio station to hear someone who would talk about news that then 6 months later, the other mainstream would report on it, if at all. So, he wasn't afraid to report on things that were kind of fringe or out there, and be the pioneer to bring it to people's attention. So he was a very trustworthy guy in my view, but then he has this lady on his show, DV Kidd, and she starts talking about the income tax. And I vividly remember listening to the show because I was driving around in my government car, in the Bay Area, somewhere between San Jose and San Francisco, and listening to this woman say that the federal income tax was largely a voluntary system because there was no mandate, there was no congressional law passed and signed by a president that made most Americans liable to pay the federal income tax, liable to file a federal tax return or keep records or any of those things that the IRS expects you to do. She said that there's not a law that requires that. And so I thought, wow, that's pretty brazen, for this woman to be making these claims. And why is she doing it on this show? Because I always thought that this host, Jeff Metcalf, was a real upstanding guy. But why would he have this kooky lady on the show? So that's the conflict that I had to resolve. Either I was really not a very good investigator, and Jeff Metcalf fooled me, or there was something to what DV Kidd said about the income tax, and neither one of those could really compute, if you know what I mean. So that's what set me on this 2-year off-duty investigative effort, whereby I went and dug into all the evidence that these freedom-minded people that the IRS called tax protesters had gathered, had evaluated, had analyzed, and I didn't create anything new inorganic. I basically just looked to either validate or invalidate what had already been researched and been encountered in terms of evidence. So I basically just acted like an investigator, gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, did what I was trained to do, but I did it off duty on my own time and my own efforts, vacation time, weekends, evenings. And really, if I had a bias at all, the bias was against what DV Kidd said, because my entire professional life revolved around the income tax. As a CPA, prior to going into the IRS, defending clients, and then, of course, as an enforcer, whose job it was to investigate people to see, find them, have them found guilty, because I did an excellent investigation, and have them serve some prison time. So it was very important for me to get to the bottom of this dispute. And after the 2-year period, just to kind of cut to the chase, because, we're only here for an hour, I unexpectedly came to the conclusion that what DV Kidd said on the radio that day was true. And I had lots of evidence I had found to back it up. So that caused me to have to confront my supervisors at the IRS. And when I say confront, I don't mean some kind of a nasty confrontation, but simply speak up. I looked at all of the Treasury rules of conduct, of course, my own ethics and religious background, and realized that I had no choice but to speak up, at least if I was supposed to keep my integrity and my morals. So I did speak up, and of course the reaction wasn't all that great. So I don't know if that's a good place to stop or take a breath.
Big surprise that the reaction wasn't a positive one, and they didn't run up to you with flowers and pockets full of sunshine and rainbows and screaming your praises. It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, here you are supposed to be enforcing, the tax code against the citizens and going after the bad guys and get these non-paying tax cheats. And here you find that there's not any evidence that they even have to pay taxes, sir. And of course, you would think, because all government employees, when I was in the military, they teach you the same thing. If you see something, you can blow the whistle. You send it up your chain of command. Well, you did exactly what they would tell you to do, and look what happened to you. I know pissing off the powers that shouldn't be wasn't in your best interest, and you still did it anyway. So again, big brass set. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Don't go anywhere. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. So, Joe, what exactly happened to you? You obviously, you pissed off somebody. Like I like to call them the powers that shouldn't be. Your supervisors, at the very least. You submit this information. You do this investigation. An actual I know it's crazy. A government agent actually doing his job and doing an investigation, right? So you actually do this investigation. The one time the IRS didn't waste our taxpayer dollars, and was when Joe was doing an investigation. And you do this investigation. You send it to your superiors. What was the repercussions that you felt immediately, and then ever since?
Well, as I'm sure there were some people that were, PO'd up the chain, but really the people that I could actually see with my own eyes had this deer in the headlights kind of look, and then they looked at me like I had two heads. Just a very odd reaction, and I think part of what didn't compute is that, if I do say so myself, during those 5 previous years I was at the IRS, I was very much sought after to be, whether it be first guy in the door on a, armed search warrant, and wanting somebody that wasn't going to shoot someone else in the back, and, they were actually going to be competent to handle a firearm and not be, a cowboy. They'd want me on the search warrant. If it was a room full of 50 boxes of, ugly accounting records, they'd want my help because they wouldn't know where to start. So everyone kind of really liked Joe. We really got along. People thought that I was a competent, hard-charging investigator. But then when I talked about the income tax, all of a sudden it's just like everybody clams up and they're like, what? It's just they couldn't process it. But never, I presented it to my supervisors because they took the same oath to support and defend the Constitution that I did. They were subject to the same Treasury rules of conduct, and you very admirably mentioned before about that there are plenty of requirements where agents are supposed to report fraud, waste, and abuse. I still have the memorandum from the commissioner at that time, where he sent out a memo to every IRS employee, like 100,000 memos, telling us, if you see fraud, waste, and abuse, speak up, report it. So, that's all but the kind of fraud, waste, and abuse that I found. If it's some toilet seat or somebody, purchased a billion too many bullets, that's okay. But, if you find out that the American people might be being lied to and cheated out of, trillions of dollars, that's off limits. So they had a very odd reaction. And when I presented my report and my information, and I presented this letter where I said, I really need to discuss this because I'd like to move forward in my job and my career, but I can't because, at least I can't yet, unless you show me the error of my analysis, if there is any error. You guys are all, basically I've gone to bat for this agency and for the income tax, and I've tried to defend this status quo position, but I'm having trouble doing so. And so I need input from my peers and my supervisors to show me how I can get myself, centered again. And that's where there was the breakdown. I also said, if you can't show me, I'm going to have to resign. And that's basically the offer that they took me up on. They encouraged me to resign and offered to give me the paperwork to resign. That was basically their reaction. So I resigned on February 25th, 1999. And, some people might think that I was I just cowardly left. But here's the deal. I wanted to make sure that I would be believed And I knew that it was very likely that the government, the IRS, would try to destroy my reputation so that I wasn't believed later. So I thought it was really imperative that I retain my good reputation so that in the future, somebody would believe that I had accumulated this evidence and that it, should be looked at. So that was the reason that I thought it best to resign.
Well, first of all, you weren't a coward for your actions. Like I said, it takes a bigger brass set to stand up when you're in the belly of the beast, especially. But that was tactically a smart idea what you did, because you went out on top. So that way, now when you talk about this as a former IRS agent, it's not crazy Joe Banister, that guy that got written up 15 times when he was in, and look at all these disciplinary remarks on his record. No. You went out on top. That was tactically a smart move. I'm going to cut us off because the break's sneaking up on us. Don't go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. We will be right back. So what Joe did was tactically sound. He went out on top. Like I said to him during the break, he went out, like Seinfeld did. He went out on top. And now that he went out on top, it's much harder to destroy his character. So if, Joe Blow from the IRS comes out, John Q. Public, their public PR spokesman comes out, who probably didn't even work for the IRS when, Joe was working there, but he'll come out and say, oh, well, we Banister's record, the guy was that disciplinary problem. I'm not saying this is what they've said. I'm just saying this could be, an example. But he could then say, no, here's my record, and look, it's clean, and they loved me, and all this, we love you, Joe, letters from the IRS or whatever, and all these great remarks and how great of a guy he was. And the only time he seems to have turned into a shitbag in their eyes, amazingly, is when he challenged the IRS's ability to actually take people's money from them, whether there's actually any constitutional power behind their BS and the whole income tax. And you become persona non grata, dude, really. As soon as you challenge their authority, you were great when you were taking people's assets. You notice that? When you were their enforcer, their dog, you were great. As soon as the dog turned around and went, hey, wait a minute, this isn't right, well, then they got mad at you, and then you became persona non grata. Now, besides the hey, Joe, since here's your offer to quit, well, beat it. Besides losing your job, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, you could laugh and say, he only lost his job, who cares? Well, as I said earlier, just remember that if you went back to the beginning of the 19th century, losing your job was a death sentence. Even earlier, losing your job was a death sentence. Even to this very day, losing your job could be a death sentence because then you don't have any money to pay your bills or eat. So losing your job is a very, very big thing. It's a very big deal. You could lose your house, your transportation, everything. And Joe lost his job. But besides losing your job, which is not a small thing, that's why I didn't want it to be played out like it was small. But besides that, Joe, what other repercussions have you felt over the years, since leaving and then having the courage to talk about this?
Well, you correctly point out, Popeye, that I was... it worked. In other words, I left at a time when I could, take all my personnel records with me and show that I was a good employee and did the right thing. But of course, after I left, then that was fair game, and they spared no expense, no effort at all to come after me. And so I guess just because it's we only here for an hour, I have to kind of be brief, but. 2003, which would have been about 4 years after I left the IRS, the IRS complained that I had acted disreputably when I was representing clients. And so, of course, they have this little Nixonian part of the IRS called the Office of Professional Responsibility. And so the IRS polices CPAs and attorneys. It's not enough that the states where the attorneys and the CPAs are licensed aren't enough. The IRS has to police them also. And so the IRS accused me of acting disreputably and saw to it through this administrative process that never saw a courtroom, let alone a jury, that I did in fact act disreputably, and the government filed a motion for summary judgment, and the administrative law judge who worked for the Environmental Protection Agency ruled that I should be disbarred from a non-existent bar because I never applied to be, on any IRS bar or part of any IRS bar, but I was disbarred from it nevertheless because, being disbarred sounds really bad, so that's good enough for the government. And then in 2004, November, I was indicted on 4 felony counts, once again relating to clients. The IRS accused me of conspiring with one of my clients to defraud the United States of America, and that I prepared on the client's behalf 3 false federal amended tax returns. So there were 4 felony counts. Was looking at a statutory maximum of, 10 to 15 years in Club Fed. Probably in real terms, if I had been convicted of all those, maybe more like 5 years. But, I've got something else I'd rather be doing with 5 years of my life. And not to mention, I didn't do anything illegal, let alone even wrong. But nevertheless, that didn't stop the government. Actually, one of the agents that I used to work with was the case agent investigating me. And so in November 2004, I was indicted. They came and arrested me. And I was out on bail within about 4 hours. But the prosecutor was yelling up and down how I was a flight risk and that I should be incarcerated until trial. And the judge kind of looked at him like, "Are you kidding me? This guy's married, he's got kids, he's got a mortgage, he doesn't even own a passport. He's not a flight risk. Why are you jumping up and down that he is?" So any little dirty trick that they could try to pull. So I spent from November of 2004 until June of 2005 preparing for trial. And I wouldn't wish getting indicted and prosecuted on my worst enemy. It was not fun at all, but in retrospect, it was having gone through it, learned a lot about myself. About that's when you really have to get a pair, as you call it, get your ducks in a row. And so the trial occurred in Sacramento, California, June of 2005, and no surprise to me, I was acquitted of all the charges. The trial lasted about a week and a half. The jury, after the verdict, actually spoke to some of the jurors, and they pointed out that it's like we couldn't figure out why we were there. I mean, every time the government tried to say something about you, it ended up making you look good. And we couldn't figure that out. We thought, well, the government's supposed to bring up all this stuff that makes the defendant look bad. But they brought out stuff that made him look good. And I said, well, that's because practically all of their documents came from my own work papers. My own letters to the IRS on behalf of the client, all of the calculations that I did. I was, plain and simple, a certified public accountant trying to go to bat for his client. And that's not a crime. But the IRS and the Department of Justice tried to turn it into a crime. And thankfully, that's why you'll never hear me complain that we don't have any rights left. We still had jury rights, and that jury was paying attention, and they acquitted me of all the charges. And not only did they acquit me, but of course they're questioning, like, why were these charges even brought? I mean, this was a joke. So, but once they learn more about the story, because of course after the trial's over, they can go to the internet and look around, and then they could see that this was about a whistleblower that had to be destroyed. It wasn't about justice or some terrible CPA who was putting their clients in danger. The IRS actually tells the public that they have a right to pay their tax first, and then if they have a protest or a problem with the tax that they paid, to ask for it back, and if necessary, sue for a refund. And that's exactly what my client wanted to do, and he basically hired me to make sure that he dotted every I and crossed every T and followed the rule book. And that's what my job was, and that's what showed up in the trial. And anybody that's ever done any kind of investigative work or knows people who investigate for a living knows that the investigation may not necessarily lead to a prosecution, because they may look into something and find that, well, there was suspicion of a crime, but no crime here. And I have indications that that's actually what the reaction was of the investigators, that we can't find any crime. But the powers that shouldn't be, as you call them, decided to prosecute me anyway. So probably cost about over $200,000 for that defense effort. And I just basically, my contribution was basically having hardly any time to do regular work. My work was defending myself for about 8 months. So thankfully, people from all over the country and even around the world contributed with their, $5, $50, $500, prayers. One family literally came with a green bag of cash after I was acquitted, because they just knew, I don't know, intuitively or what, but they just, we were struggling because, as I say, I couldn't really work. I had to pull out everything but the kitchen sink to defend myself, and we were victorious. Again, no surprise to us. But even there, at the courthouse steps, I get this big bag of cash shoved in my stomach. And, so it's just amazing how things happen if you just, stick your neck out. Sometimes you stick it out and, like back in Britain, you get it chopped off. But and I was prepared for that, but it's just an amazing experience to have everyone come together and almost be, I don't want to make this sound like I don't think of myself this way, but I know people, they told me, they're like, we've been praying for decades that somebody would just be honest and just ask a few questions. And so, I guess I was that person, and, I don't have any regrets whatsoever. I guess if I had any regret is that just more agents don't get a spine. And they must know that this is totally phony and that they're destroying people's lives without authority to do so. And that's probably my biggest disappointment, is that there aren't more people that'll get a spine and do the right thing, adhere to their oath, and take a look at the Treasury Rules of Conduct and do the right thing.
It's just very humbling to hear how just laid back and humble you are about this whole thing. I mean, dude, you literally took on, a dragon, a monster, and I mean, I know. I'm sure there were times you were probably tearing your hair out, but you're really, I mean, dude, it's a testament to your faith and your inner strength that you're so humble about all this. It really is, Joe. I'm just amazed at how, after all this, you're still just a humble, really nice guy. And ladies and gentlemen, like, talking to him off air, network stuff and whatever, he's the same way. This isn't a radio persona. He's this laid back and humble in real life. I mean, it's just like I said, it's a testament to your inner strength and your faith, man. Just, wow.
Well, I just try to be a good example. There are people that were good examples for me, and I'm very appreciative of them. And I haven't abandoned any of my feelings, thoughts, desires about that we have to have government, we have taxation, but we do not have to have dishonest taxation. We do not have to have a government who steals from us. That's why a new country was founded. That's why a new nation was founded back in 1776. And I'm not so naive to think it can't happen, or that corruption can't happen. But I've always thought of this country as different. I'm probably a little older than you, and we had. In school, we would talk about the Soviet Union and Cuba and China, communist China, and I always thought, wow, we are so fortunate to live in America where we don't have political prisoners, we don't have gulags, we don't have prison camps. And when I went to the IRS and found out, we really do have those things. that's part of my motivation. It was like, no, ain't happening here, not on my watch.
See, more people should take a note from you. And really, more people that are working for government or whatever, people should not be afraid. I mean, you want to talk about whistleblower? So he wasn't. He did the smart thing. He knew he had to. Like I said, that was tactically sound. You had to retain that untouchability, so that way they couldn't try to build a straw man argument against you. Just that was really smart. All right, ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. We're right back. Final segment, ladies and gentlemen. Man, it went by fast. Whew, gentlemen, have to have you back on. It went by way too quick. Next time I'll pick your brain a little bit, but I wanted to make sure the listeners got a chance to get to know you a little bit. Because of of who you are and the courage it took to do what you did, but also because you do a show here on Unbound, and I think people, like I said, they should know who you are, know about you, especially if they're going to look into the whole IRS fraud and income tax fraud. They're going to know who you are anyway because your name inevitably comes up. But I think they should tune into your broadcast too. So I'm glad that I got to, I wanted to give you pretty much the hour to let you talk and just lay out in a nutshell what happened to you. I know it goes much deeper than that. But go ahead really quick before I forget. I want you to plug your site and plug the radio show and anything else that you want. If books, DVDs, anything you want. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Popeye. agentfortruth.com is my website. Also freedomabovefortune.com. At agentfortruth.com, there's one of the sections is Become an Agent for Truth, and I would highly recommend people go there to maybe get a nice little roadmap, not a roadmap to how to stop the IRS from ever bothering you again, but certainly a roadmap to kind of understand the big picture, at least in terms of how I view it. And then my radio show on Unbound is between 5 and 6 p.m. Pacific time. So that'd be 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern time. It's called the Agent for Truth radio show. And I'll probably be playing hooky from it tomorrow. I'm going to a family reunion. And I think another thing that just drives the government crazy is that the Banister family is full of badges and guns. I've got 3 younger brothers, and 2 of them are cops, and one's a firefighter. So my mom was really happy at one point, and she had all 4 sons. Well, I guess 4 of them had badges, and 3 of them had guns, and all had passed the background checks, and made it to that point. So she has this picture with all of us in uniform, or in my case, it was a suit with a gun and a badge. But anyway, so I'm going to be with all the Banister government servants tomorrow, and I think that really gives the government fits because they like to paint people as somehow anti-government, anti-tax, and it's just another one of their demonizing mechanisms that's a bunch of bunk. And I guess I play that to the hilt, as much as I can because I really am. It makes me sick to my stomach how other people who don't come from the IRS or don't come from government service, they have every right to be just as appalled as I am and be listened to as much as I am. But the government has it's a bunch of weasels, and so they got to figure out a way to weasel and get their way, and so they use very surreptitious and deceitful mechanisms. And one of them is, what would you know, kind of thing. Or just immediately saying you're racist, you're a knuckle-dragging mountain dweller, you're, a miscreant, you don't want to get along with anybody, you don't want to pay your fair share. So, as far as I'm concerned, if that's what helps to get people to listen to all of us, then, all the better. That used to have a badge and a gun, and all the Banister family still does. So I haven't abandoned, like I said, I've probably said this too many times. We have to have some level of government, actually like a constitutional government that actually obeys the Constitution. What a concept. And anyway, so if anybody listens tomorrow to the show between 5 and 6 Pacific, they're probably going to hear a repeat. But other than that, I hope people will tune in now and then and go to agentfortruth.com.
Well, it's worth it even to hear your rebroads. And I mean, I myself, I've been called. Some of my friends have been like, "You have a little bit of an anarchist in you," and I'm like, "Let's not even misuse the word anarchy because that's a whole different thing." But I mean, I've actually done shows on what real anarchy is compared to what the actual label is, misuse of terms or whatever. But I'm not running around 100% full-on anarchist. But the term government itself, I like to say structure, because government is actually formed from two words, two Latin words, verb and a noun, govern and mentis. Mentis meaning like mind or man, mind, and govern obviously to control. So it's literally government. Literally means mind control. I could not make this up, dude. So like when people are like, "We need government," I'm like, "You need mind control?" No, you don't. You need structure. Structure, I get. I'm firefighter for over 6 years and former military. I totally understand structure. Okay, I get it. But I'm not a big fan of huge government looking over your shoulder. But I agree there does need to be some sort of structure. You want things to flow and operate smoothly. You don't want just complete chaos. So yeah, I get that. Joe, we're out of time, but I'm going to have you back on to just have a discussion about that in and of itself.
I'd be happy to anytime, Popeye.
Man, I have to say, dude, it's just honor to have you on, and thank you so much again for having the courage to stand up to the beast that is the IRS.
Well, I appreciate what you do, and I'm a big fan. I signed up to Federal Jack a long time ago, and I love what you do.
Well, thank you. Awesome endorsement. Couldn't ask for a better one. Ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. I'll catch you all again Monday. Love you all. We're out of here.